I discovered the theft on a Wednesday morning in November when I walked out to my cabin's woodshed and found half my neatly stacked firewood missing, the remaining logs scattered across the frozen ground like someone had ransacked the place in a hurry. My name is William Zimmerman, and I had spent the better part of 3 weekends that fall chopping, splitting, and stacking 2 full cords of oak and maple for the winter. I lived in Pine Ridge Estates, a gated community nestled in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, about 20 miles outside of North Conway. The place was beautiful, with massive pines surrounding each property and mountain views that made the steep HOA fees almost justifiable. Almost. I stood there in my thermal jacket, breath fogging in the crisp morning air, staring at the mess. The woodshed was a simple 3-sided structure I had built myself, open on one side for easy access. Someone had clearly helped themselves to my hard work, and judging by the tire tracks and the light dusting of snow, they had backed a truck right up to take a substantial load. "Son of a," I muttered, walking around the perimeter. No signs of forced entry, because there was nothing to force. The shed was open by design. But this was a gated community. We had security. We had rules. We had a homeowners association that charged me $400 a month to supposedly maintain order and property values. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the tire tracks, the disturbed wood pile, and the missing section. Then I called the HOA office. "Pine Ridge Estates, HOA. This is Deborah speaking," came the cheerful voice on the other end. So, "Hi, this is William Zimmerman at 47 Aspen Lane. I need to report a theft. Someone stole about half a cord of firewood from my property last night." There was a pause. "Firewood?" "Yes, firewood. I had 2 cords stacked in my woodshed, and someone backed a truck up and took a significant amount. There are tire tracks and everything. This is theft." "Well, Mr. Zimmerman, have you considered that maybe it was just blown over by the wind? We've had some strong gusts lately." I looked at the clear tire impressions in the snow. "No, Deborah, wind doesn't leave Goodyear tread patterns. Someone drove onto my property and stole my wood." "I see. Well, I will make a note of it and pass it along to our board president. She handles all community disputes and concerns. This is not a dispute. This is theft. I want to file a formal complaint, and I want to check the gate security footage to see who entered my driveway." Another pause. "The security footage is reviewed only by board members for privacy reasons. I will have President Henderson contact you." President Henderson. I had met Sharon Henderson exactly once, at a mandatory HOA meeting 3 months ago when I first moved in. She was a woman in her late 50s with blonde hair, cut in that particular style that seemed to be issued along with a certain attitude, wearing a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She had spent 45 minutes of that meeting discussing the 17 approved shades of beige for exterior trim and the absolute prohibition on any lawn ornaments except those purchased from the pre-approved vendor list. "Fine," I said. "Have her call me today." "I will pass along the message," Deborah said, her tone suggesting she would do no such thing with any urgency. I hung up and walked back inside my cabin. It was a nice place, really. 2 bedrooms, open floor plan, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the mountains. I had bought it as a weekend getaway that turned into a full-time residence when my tech job went permanently remote during the pandemic years. The peace and quiet of New Hampshire had been exactly what I needed after 15 years in Boston's tech scene. The HOA had seemed like a minor annoyance at first. Sure, the rules were extensive, a 47-page document I had to sign acknowledging I had read. But the community was beautiful, well-maintained, and the neighbors seemed pleasant enough in passing. I made coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, looking out at the woodshed. Losing half a cord was not just annoying, it was expensive. I had paid nearly $400 for the wood to be delivered, then spent hours processing it myself. Oak and maple burned hot and long, perfect for the wood stove that was my primary heat source. The cabin had electric baseboard heat, but at New Hampshire's electricity rates, I would go broke running it all winter. My phone rang around 2 that afternoon. Unknown number, local area code. "This is William." "Mr. Zimmerman, this is Sharon Henderson, president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. I received a message that you called about some missing firewood." "That's right. Someone stole about half a cord from my woodshed last night. I have photos of the tire tracks and the missing wood. I would like to review the gate security footage to identify who did this. Well, I'm not sure that's necessary. You see, there was actually a community email sent out last week about a firewood sharing initiative. Several residents have been experiencing shortages, and we encourage those with excess to share with their neighbors. It is part of our community spirit here at Pine Ridge. I felt my jaw tighten. I never received any such email, and I certainly never agreed to participate in any sharing initiative. That was my personal property, purchased and processed by me for my own use. That's theft, Mrs. Henderson. It is Ms. Henderson, actually, she corrected, her voice taking on an edge. And I think theft is a very strong word for what amounts to a community member in need taking advantage of available resources. We are a family here at Pine Ridge. We look out for each other. Looking out for each other would involve asking permission before taking someone's property. Who took my wood? I want a name. I am not at liberty to discuss other residents' activities. Privacy is very important to us here. Now, I suggest you review Section 14 of your HOA agreement, which clearly states that visible stockpiles of materials may be subject to community sharing protocols during emergency situations. I pulled up the HOA document on my laptop and scrolled to Section 14. It was about stockpiling hazardous materials and required disclosure of things like propane tanks and generators. There was nothing about firewood sharing. Ms. Henderson, Section 14 is about hazardous materials disclosure. There is nothing here about community sharing of firewood. Well, it falls under the general community welfare provisions, the spirit of the rule, Mr. Zimmerman. We cannot have some residents hoarding resources while others freeze. I'm sure you understand. What I understand is that someone stole my property and you are refusing to help me identify the thief. I will be filing a police report. There was a sharp intake of breath. That would be very unwise, Mr. Zimmerman. Taking internal community matters to outside authorities reflects poorly on our community reputation and property values. It could also be considered a violation of your agreement to resolve disputes through HOA mediation first. I strongly advise against it. Then I want a formal mediation session scheduled immediately, and I want compensation for my stolen wood. I will add you to the agenda for next month's board meeting. We meet the second Tuesday of each month. You will have 5 minutes to present your concern. Next month, it is November 15th. You want me to wait until December 10th? That is our standard procedure. In the meantime, I suggest you embrace the community spirit that makes Pine Ridge such a special place. Have a blessed day, Mr. Zimmerman. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone in disbelief. This was insane. Someone had stolen my property, and the HOA was not only protecting them, but actively blocking me from finding out who did it. The threat about filing a police report was particularly galling. I pulled up the HOA agreement again and read through the dispute resolution section. It did say that residents should attempt to resolve disputes through HOA mediation before seeking outside legal action, but it also had exceptions for criminal matters. Theft was criminal. I was reaching for my phone to call the local police when I heard the sound of a truck engine outside. I looked up to see a white Dodge Ram backing up to my woodshed. A woman got out, wearing expensive-looking winter gear and designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky. I was out the door in seconds. "Hey, what the hell do you think you were doing?" The woman turned, looking startled but not guilty. She was probably in her mid-50s, with that same blonde haircut that seemed standard issue, and an expression that quickly shifted from surprise to indignation. "Excuse me, I am just collecting some firewood. There is no need for profanity." "That is my firewood. You are on my property." "It is community firewood, actually. Sharon sent an email about the sharing program. I am Karren Morrison. I live at 52 Birch Court." She said this as if her name and address were credentials that explained everything. "I never agreed to any sharing program. This is my wood that I paid for and processed myself. You need to leave. Now." Karren crossed her arms. "I do not appreciate your tone. Sharon specifically said that residents with excess wood should share with those in need. I have a fireplace and no wood supply. You clearly have plenty. I have exactly what I need for winter, which is now half gone because someone, presumably you, already stole a load. You are trespassing and attempting to commit theft. Leave my property immediately or I'm calling the police." The police? She actually laughed. Over firewood? You really are new here, are you not? This is how things work at Pine Ridge. We are a community. We share. Maybe if you were not so selfish and antisocial, you would understand that. I pulled out my phone and started recording. For the record, it is November 15th at approximately 2:30 p.m. I am William Zimmerman, and I am standing on my property at 47 Aspen Lane. This woman, who identified herself as Karren Morrison from 52 Birch Court, has backed her truck up to my woodshed and is attempting to take my firewood without permission. I have asked her to leave and she has refused. Karren's face flushed red. You cannot record me without my permission. That is illegal. Actually, New Hampshire is a one-party consent state, and I am the one party consenting. You are trespassing on my property and attempting to commit theft. Leave now. I am calling Sharon, Karren said, pulling out her own phone. This is harassment. You are creating a hostile environment. Please do call her. I would love to have this conversation with both of you present. Karren turned away, phone to her ear, speaking in urgent whispers. I kept my phone trained on her truck in the woodshed, documenting everything. After about 2 minutes, she lowered her phone and turned back to me. Sharon says you are violating community standards and creating discord. She is very disappointed in your behavior. She also said that if you continue to harass community members, there will be consequences. The consequence I am worried about is you stealing my property. Leave. Now. This is your final warning before I call the police. Karren made a disgusted sound, stomped back to her truck, and climbed in. She revved the engine unnecessarily loud and drove off, spinning her tires slightly in the snow. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding with anger and adrenaline. This was absolutely surreal. I had lived in Boston for 15 years and never had a single problem with neighbors or theft. 3 months in this supposedly upscale gated community, and I was dealing with organized wood theft protected by the HOA. I went back inside and immediately called the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, who seemed somewhat bemused but took down my information. She said a deputy would come by within the next few hours to take a report. Deputy Marcus Chen arrived around 4:30, just as the early winter darkness was settling in. He was a young guy, maybe late 20s, with a professional demeanor that put me at ease immediately. Mr. Zimmerman, I am Deputy Chen. You called about a theft? I walked him through everything, showed him the woodshed, the tire tracks that were still visible, and played him the video of Karren Morrison. He took notes, photographed the scene, and nodded thoughtfully. So the HOA president is claiming there is some kind of community sharing program that allows residents to take your firewood? That is what she said, but it is not in the HOA agreement. I read the whole thing, and even if it was, you cannot just take people's property without asking. No, you definitely cannot, Deputy Chen agreed. This is pretty clearly theft. The value of half a cord of processed hardwood would put it around $200 to $300, which makes it a misdemeanor theft. The question is whether you want to press charges. I want my wood back, and I want this to stop. If that requires pressing charges, then yes. He nodded. I will write up a report. You said you have the woman on video identifying herself? Yes, Karren Morrison, 52 Birch Court. Okay, I will follow up with her. In the meantime, I would suggest putting up some trail cameras if you have them. Document any further incidents. And Mr. Zimmerman? Be careful with HOAs. I've seen situations like this before. Sometimes they can make life very difficult for residents they perceive as troublemakers. I just want to be left alone and not have my stuff stolen. I understand. I will be in touch. After he left, I ordered 2 trail cameras on Amazon with overnight shipping. Then I sat down and documented everything in a detailed email to myself, including timestamps, photos, and the video. If this was going to escalate, I wanted records. The next morning, I found a formal notice taped to my front door. It was on Pine Ridge Estates HOA letterhead, signed by Sharon Henderson. Notice of violation. Mr. William Zimmerman of 47 Aspen Lane is hereby notified of the following violations of Pine Ridge Estates community standards. 1. Creating a hostile environment for community members. 2. Harassment of fellow residents. 3. Involving outside authorities in internal community matters. 4. Failure to participate in community sharing initiatives. A fine of $500 is hereby assessed. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional fines and possible legal action. A hearing is scheduled for December 10th at the monthly board meeting to address these violations and determine if further action is necessary. I read it 3 times, my disbelief growing with each pass. They were fining me $500 for reporting a theft. This was beyond absurd. It was actionable. I took photos of the notice, then went inside and called the number on the letter. Deborah answered again. I just received a violation notice that is completely bogus. I'm being fined for reporting a crime. The board has determined that your behavior violated community standards. If you wish to dispute the fine, you may present your case at the December board meeting. I want to speak to Sharon Henderson immediately. Ms. Henderson is not available. She will see you at the board meeting. This is retaliation, and it is illegal. You cannot fine someone for filing a police report. I'm just the office manager, Mr. Zimmerman. I do not make these decisions. Will there be anything else? I hung up and immediately called a lawyer. I found an attorney in North Conway named Robert Brennan who specialized in HOA disputes. His receptionist got me an appointment for the next day. While I waited for the trail cameras to arrive, I spent the afternoon researching HOA law in New Hampshire. What I found was disturbing. HOAs had broad powers, but they were not unlimited. They could not violate state or federal law, and they could not retaliate against residents for exercising their legal rights. The problem was that fighting an HOA required time, money, and energy that most people did not have. Many residents just paid the fines and accepted the abuse because fighting back was too expensive. But I was not most people. I had a good income, savings, and more importantly, a stubborn streak that my ex-wife had frequently complained about. If Sharon Henderson and Karren Morrison wanted a fight, they picked the wrong person. The trail cameras arrived Friday morning. I set them up covering different angles of the woodshed, making sure they had clear views of anyone approaching. They were motion activated and uploaded footage directly to cloud storage. If anyone came near my wood again, I would have crystal clear evidence. That night, around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera app and watched in real time as Karren Morrison's white Dodge Ram backed up to my woodshed again. She got out, wearing dark clothing this time, and started loading wood into her truck bed. I was out of bed and pulling on clothes immediately. I grabbed my phone, made sure it was recording, and headed outside. I also hit the button to save the trail camera footage to a separate file. "Karren, what the hell are you doing?" She jumped, dropping a log. In the glow of her truck's taillights, I could see her face flush with anger and embarrassment. "This is community property. Sharon said I could have it." "Sharon does not own my wood. You are stealing. I have you on camera. Again. Leave now or I'm calling the police. Again." "You are such an asshole. Everyone in the community is talking about you. You are the problem here, not me. We are just trying to live our lives and you come in here with your attitude and your rules and ruin everything." "My rules? You mean laws against theft? It is not theft, it is sharing. God, you are just like every other entitled man I have ever met. You probably have plenty of money to buy more wood. Some of us are on fixed incomes. Some of us need help, but you do not care about anyone but yourself. You are driving a $60,000 truck that is less than 2 years old. You are not exactly destitute. Buy your own wood." I should not have to when there is perfectly good wood sitting here going to waste. It is not going to waste. It is going to heat my home through the winter. Now, get off my property before I call the sheriff. Karren made a show of dropping the logs she was holding, letting them crash loudly onto the ground. "Fine. I hope you freeze. I hope your selfish attitude keeps you warm when everyone in this community turns against you." She got in her truck and tore off, spraying slush and gravel. I stood there in my pajamas and winter coat, breath fogging in the freezing air, and wondered what the hell I had gotten myself into. I called the non-emergency sheriff's line and reported the second incident. The dispatcher said she would add it to my case file and have Deputy Chen follow up. Then I went back inside, too angry to sleep, and spent the rest of the night watching terrible late-night TV. Deputy Chen called me the next morning. "Mr. Zimmerman, I got the report about last night. You have video? Crystal clear. Both dash camera and trail camera footage showing her loading my wood into her truck at 2 a.m. That is good evidence. I went by her residence yesterday to talk to her about the first incident. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, that the HOA president had authorized her to take wood from your property. I explained that the HOA president does not have the authority to give away your personal property. She was not happy about that. Clearly not, since she came back for more in the middle of the night. Yeah, that is going to be a problem for her. Look, I am going to go ahead and charge her with misdemeanor theft. She will get a summons to appear in court. Given that you have her on video twice, and she admitted to taking the wood, it is a pretty solid case. She will probably end up with a fine and restitution order. What about the HOA president? She is the one encouraging this. That is trickier. Unless we can prove she directly ordered or participated in the theft, being a bad HOA president is not a crime. But I would definitely recommend getting a lawyer for the HOA issues. They sound pretty out of control. I have an appointment Monday with an HOA attorney. Good. Document everything. And Mr. Zimmerman? Watch your back. These situations can get nasty. I spent the weekend restacking and organizing my remaining wood and building a simple but sturdy gate for the woodshed with a heavy-duty padlock. It was annoying to have to lock up my own firewood on my own property in a gated community, but clearly it was necessary. Monday morning, I drove into North Conway for my appointment with Robert Brennan. His office was in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, and he turned out to be a gray-haired man in his 60s with the weary expression of someone who had dealt with too many HOA cases. Mr. Zimmerman, come in. I read through the documents you emailed. This is quite a situation. We sat in his office, and I walked him through everything from the beginning. He took notes, asked questions, and occasionally shook his head. Okay, so the good news is that they have absolutely no legal leg to stand on. You cannot fine someone for reporting a crime. That is clear retaliation, and it is prohibited under New Hampshire law. The bad news is that fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming, even when you are right. What are my options? Well, you can refuse to pay the fine and fight them when they try to enforce it. They will probably put a lien on your property eventually if you do not pay. At that point, we can challenge the lien in court, present evidence of retaliation, and almost certainly get it dismissed. We might also be able to sue for damages and legal fees. How much are we talking about in legal fees? For something like this, if it goes to litigation, you are looking at $10,000 to $20,000, maybe more if they really dig in. I felt my stomach sink. That's insane. Welcome to HOA disputes. The other option is to try to work it out internally. Go to the board meeting, present your case, hope that cooler heads prevail. Sometimes when you show up with documentation and evidence, boards back down because they realize they are in the wrong. And if they don't, then we fight. But Mr. Zimmerman, I have to be honest with you. I've been doing this for 25 years. HOAs very rarely admit they are wrong, especially when the board president has an ego invested in being right. This Sharon Henderson sounds like a classic example. She has probably been running that HOA like her personal fiefdom for years, and nobody has challenged her because it was not worth the hassle. So what do you recommend? He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Document everything, every interaction, every email, every incident. Go to the board meeting in December with all your evidence organized and present it calmly and professionally. Do not get emotional. Do not make threats. Just lay out the facts. If they still uphold the fine after that, then we have an even stronger retaliation case. In the meantime, secure your property and avoid any further confrontations if possible. Karren Morrison has been criminally charged with theft. That is going to come out. Good. That supports your position. The more evidence you have that you were the victim here, not the aggressor, the better. I left his office feeling somewhat better, but also deeply frustrated. The system was designed to protect HOAs, not homeowners. Even when the HOA was clearly in the wrong, fighting back required resources that many people simply did not have. Over the next 3 weeks, my trail cameras caught Karren Morrison driving slowly past my cabin at least 6 times. She never stopped or got out, but the message was clear. She was watching, waiting for an opportunity. I also started noticing other small annoyances. My trash cans were knocked over twice, which could have been animals but felt suspicious. Someone left a nasty anonymous note on my windshield, calling me a selfish prick. And I got 3 more violation notices from the HOA for increasingly petty things. One was for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. They had been out for maybe 14 hours because I worked late and forgot to bring them in. Fine, $200. Another was for unauthorized modifications to my property, referring to the gate I had built on my woodshed. Fine, $300. The third was for creating a nuisance by having security cameras that infringed on neighbors' privacy expectations. Fine, $500. Each one was signed by Sharon Henderson, and each one was dated to stack up before the December board meeting. By the time December 10th rolled around, I had accumulated $2,000 in fines, all for completely bogus violations or retaliation for protecting my property. I forwarded everything to Robert Brennan, who added it all to his file and confirmed what I already knew. This was textbook harassment and retaliation. The board meeting was held at the Pine Ridge Community Center, a nice facility with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documentation, printed photos, and a USB drive with all my video evidence. There were maybe 20 other residents scattered around the room, most of them older, all of them giving me curious or hostile looks. Sharon Henderson sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members, 2 men and 2 women, all in their 50s or 60s. Karren Morrison sat in the front row, glaring at me. Sharon called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. She went through standard business first: approval of last month's minutes, treasurer's report, discussion of landscaping bids for spring. It was all very procedural and boring, clearly designed to wear people down before getting to actual issues. At 7:45, she finally said, "Now we will hear from Mr. Zimmerman regarding his disputes with community standards and his fellow residents. Mr. Zimmerman, you have 5 minutes." I stood up, walked to the front, and plugged my USB drive into the presentation laptop they had set up. "Thank you. I'm going to present evidence that the fines I have been assessed are retaliatory and without basis, and that I have been the victim of repeated theft that the HOA has not only ignored, but actively facilitated." I started with the photos of my woodshed after the first theft, the tire tracks, the missing wood. Then I showed the timeline of my call to the HOA, Sharon's dismissive response, and her claim about a community sharing program that did not exist in any HOA documents. Here is video of Karren Morrison on my property on November 16th, attempting to take more of my firewood after I had already reported the first theft. I played the dash camera video, which clearly showed Karren identifying herself and claiming Sharon had authorized her to take the wood. And here is trail camera footage from November 18th at 2 a.m., showing Ms. Morrison returning to steal more wood in the middle of the night. That video was even more damning, showing her clearly loading wood into her truck. Ms. Morrison was subsequently charged with misdemeanor theft by the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. Here is a copy of the police report. I held up the document. After I reported this theft and refused to participate in what the HOA president called a sharing program that does not exist in our community documents, I began receiving violation notices for increasingly petty infractions. Trash cans out for 14 hours instead of 12. Installing a gate to protect my property from theft. Having security cameras that I installed after being repeatedly victimized. These are not legitimate violations. This is retaliation for exercising my legal right to report a crime and protect my property. I put up a slide showing all the violation notices side by side, with their dates and amounts highlighted. $2,000 in fines in less than a month, all issued after I reported the theft and refused to allow my property to be stolen. This is harassment, this is retaliation, and it is illegal under New Hampshire law. I turned to face Sharon directly. I am requesting that all fines be rescinded, that the HOA issue a formal apology, and that clear policies be put in place to prevent this kind of abuse from happening to other residents. Sharon's face had gone through several shades of red during my presentation. When I finished, she shuffled some papers and said, "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. The board will take your presentation under consideration. However, I need to address several misrepresentations you have made." I have not misrepresented anything, Everything I showed is documented fact. You have presented a very one-sided view of the situation. The fact is, you have been a disruptive presence in this community since you arrived. You refuse to participate in community activities. You are hostile to your neighbors. You have created an atmosphere of distrust by installing surveillance equipment and calling the police over minor neighborly disputes. Theft is not a minor dispute. Ms. Morrison believed in good faith that the firewood was available for community use. She made a mistake based on information she received. That does not make her a criminal. She was charged with theft by the sheriff's office. That is not my opinion. That is a legal fact. Karren stood up from the front row. I'm being persecuted because of him. He is the problem, not me. I am a single woman on a fixed income, and he is making my life hell because I made an honest mistake. You came to my property twice after being told to stop, the second time at 2 in the morning. That is not an honest mistake. Enough! Sharon slammed her hand on the table. Mr. Zimmerman, you are out of order. Sit down. I am presenting my case as you said I could. You have presented your case. Now sit down or I will have you removed from this meeting. One of the other board members, a balding man in a golf shirt, leaned forward. I move that we uphold all violations and fines as issued. Mr. Zimmerman's behavior has been consistently problematic, and his attempt to play the victim here is transparent. Second, said one of the women immediately. All in favor? Sharon asked. 4 hands went up. The 5th board member, a younger woman who had been taking notes, hesitated, then slowly raised her hand as well. The motion carries. All fines are upheld. Additionally, Mr. Zimmerman, you are being placed on probation. Any further violations or disruptive behavior will result in additional fines and potential legal action to remove you from the community. This meeting is adjourned. The room erupted in applause from the other residents. I stood there, folder in hand, absolutely stunned. I'd presented clear evidence of theft, harassment, and retaliation, and they had not only dismissed it but doubled down. Sharon was gathering her papers, clearly considering the matter closed. I walked up to the table. This is not over. You cannot fine someone for reporting a crime. I will be filing a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and retaliation. Sharon looked up at me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. You are welcome to try, Mr. Zimmerman. But I suggest you read the binding arbitration clause in your HOA agreement. Any legal disputes must go through arbitration first, with an arbitrator selected from our approved list. And those arbitrators know how important HOAs are to maintaining property values and community standards. You will lose, you will waste thousands of dollars, and you will still owe the fines plus interest. I have been doing this for 12 years. You are not the first resident who thought they could fight the board. You will not be the last. But you will lose. I looked at the other board members, hoping one of them would show some sign of discomfort or disagreement. They all just looked back at me with the same smug expressions. This is wrong, I said quietly. What is wrong is your selfish attitude. Now please leave before I call security. I left, my hands shaking with anger. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for a long time, just trying to process what had happened. This was America. This was a country of laws. And yet 5 people had just overridden those laws because they had a little bit of power and no accountability. I drove home and immediately emailed Robert Brennan with a full summary of the meeting. He responded the next morning with a long email explaining that Sharon was technically right about the arbitration clause, but that we could potentially challenge it on grounds that the arbitration process itself was rigged. It would be an uphill battle. Then he told me something interesting. He had done some research on Pine Ridge Estates and found that there had been 3 other lawsuits filed against the HOA in the past 5 years. All 3 had settled quietly with confidentiality agreements, which meant Sharon had a pattern of this behavior, and the HOA had been paying to make problems go away rather than fixing the underlying issues. If you want to fight this, he wrote, I am willing to take it on. But you need to understand it is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and ugly. They will make your life hell. They will fine you for everything they can think of. They will try to force you to sell and leave. The question is whether you are prepared for that level of conflict. I sat at my kitchen table, looking out at my woodshed with its new gate and padlocks, and thought about what I wanted. I had bought this place for peace and quiet. I had bought it to get away from conflict and stress. Fighting a prolonged legal battle was the opposite of that. But backing down meant letting them win. It meant accepting that bullies with a little bit of power could just take whatever they wanted and punish anyone who objected. It meant Karren Morrison would face no real consequences for stealing from me, and Sharon Henderson would continue abusing her position. I was still mulling this over when my trail cameras sent me another alert. It was 3 p.m, broad daylight. I pulled up the feed and saw a township truck parked near my woodshed. 2 men in coveralls were looking at my gate and talking. I went outside. "Can I help you?" One of them, an older guy with a gray beard, turned to me. "Are you William Zimmerman?" "I am." "We are from the Township Building Department. We received a complaint that you constructed an unpermitted structure on your property. This gate appears to be the structure in question." "It is a gate on a woodshed that I built. It does not require a permit." Actually, any structure or modification over $50 in value requires a permit in this township. We will need to inspect the woodshed itself to determine if it was properly permitted. The woodshed was here when I bought the place. I just added a gate. "Do you have documentation that it was permitted originally?" "No, it is just 3 posts and a roof. It is not even a fully enclosed structure." The guy made notes on a clipboard. "We are going to need you to pull permits for both the original structure and the modification. Until that is resolved, you are in violation of township code. You will receive a citation in the mail." I knew exactly what was happening. Sharon had called in a complaint to the township, bringing in another level of bureaucracy to harass me. It was a classic move. "This is ridiculous. This is clear harassment." "I'm just doing my job, sir. You can dispute the citation through the normal channels." They took some photos, made more notes, and left. That night, I made a decision. I was not going to fight them the way they expected. I was not going to get dragged into endless legal battles and bureaucratic quagmires. I was going to get creative. I started researching what actually bothered wasps and hornets. It turned out that in New Hampshire, bald-faced hornets built large paper nests in trees and sometimes in woodpiles. The nests could remain active well into November in mild years, and the insects became more aggressive as the weather turned cold. The nests themselves were fragile and dangerous to disturb. I happened to know exactly where several active bald-faced hornet nests were located on the community property because I had nearly walked into one during a hike in October. They were in the wooded area behind the community center, attached to trees about 30 yards off the main trail. It took some careful work with a long pole saw and heavy protective gear I bought online, but over the course of 3 nights, I managed to cut down 3 good-sized hornet nests without getting stung. The insects were sluggish in the cold, and working at night helped. I carefully placed each nest in a large cardboard box and transported them back to my property. Then I found several logs in my woodpile that had hollow sections and natural cavities, perfect for creating a new home for angry hornets. Working very carefully in my garage with full protective gear, I transferred portions of each nest into the hollow logs, using tape and natural materials to secure them in place. The hornets were getting increasingly agitated, but the cold kept them from swarming. I took those special logs and placed them prominently in my woodpile, right at the front where they would be the first ones someone would grab if they were in a hurry. Then, I removed the padlock from my gate, making access easy again. And I waited. It took less than a week. My trail camera caught Karren Morrison pulling up at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. She clearly thought I was asleep or away. She opened the gate, walked right up to the woodpile, and reached for the first logs. What happened next was beautiful. The hornets, already agitated from being moved and disturbed, exploded out of the hollow logs the moment Karren grabbed them. Even in the infrared camera footage, I could see the cloud of insects swarming around her. She screamed, dropped the logs, and ran for her truck, swatting at the air around her. She did not make it to the truck before the hornets got her good. The camera caught her stumbling, slapping at her face and arms, screaming profanities I could not quite make out in the audio. She finally got in the truck and took off, but not before taking what looked like dozens of stings. I watched the footage 3 times, a grim satisfaction settling over me. It was not nice to take pleasure in someone else's pain, but Karren had stolen from me repeatedly, gotten me fined thousands of dollars, and faced no real consequences. Now she had some consequences. The next morning, I carefully removed the hornet-infested logs using full protective gear and disposed of them safely off my property. Then, I put the padlock back on the gate. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain, which suddenly became available to me through a friendly email from a neighbor who apparently enjoyed drama, that Karren had gone to the emergency room with 17 hornet stings, including several on her face. She was okay, but apparently she was telling everyone that I had booby-trapped my woodpile and she was going to sue me. 3 days later, I got a letter from an attorney representing Karren Morrison, threatening legal action for intentional infliction of emotional distress and reckless endangerment by setting a trap designed to cause physical harm. I forwarded it to Robert Brennan with a simple note. Thoughts? He called me an hour later and I could hear the amusement in his voice. This is amazing. Did you actually put hornet nests in your firewood? I found some logs that happened to have hornet nests in them. Hornets naturally nest in wood sometimes. I was not aware of it when I stacked them. How would I have known? Right, of course. And you just happened to remove the padlock you had installed for security? The hornets made me realize that physical security was less important than natural deterrence. I was conducting an experiment in ecological property protection. Robert laughed. You cannot say that in court. But here's the thing. She was trespassing on your property with intent to commit theft. She has already been criminally charged for this exact behavior. Even if you did deliberately place those logs as a deterrent, which I am sure you did not, wink wink, she has no standing to sue you for consequences she suffered while committing a crime on your property. So I should ignore the letter. I will respond to her attorney on your behalf. I will point out that his client was trespassing with criminal intent, that bald-faced hornets commonly nest in firewood in New Hampshire, that you had no duty to make your property safe for trespassers, and that any lawsuit will be met with a vigorous defense, including countersuits for harassment and abuse of process. He will go away. What about the HOA? Have they sent you anything about this incident? Not yet. They might try to fine you for something related to it. If they do, it just adds to our retaliation case. You are building quite a file here, Mr. Zimmerman. That afternoon, Sharon Henderson showed up at my door. She looked furious. Mr. Zimmerman, we need to talk. I am recording this conversation, I said, pulling out my phone. Just so we are clear. Fine. Karren Morrison is in the hospital because of your reckless and dangerous behavior. She was in the emergency room and has since been released, and she was trespassing on my property with intent to commit theft for the third time when she encountered some hornets that were nesting in my firewood. I had no knowledge the hornets were there. That's absurd. You deliberately set a trap. Prove it. Sharon's eyes narrowed. You think you are very clever, do not you? You think you can just do whatever you want and get away with it? I think I can protect my property from thieves and expect the HOA to stay out of it, yes. You have made an enemy of the wrong person, Mr. Zimmerman. I have been running this HOA for 12 years. I have dealt with dozens of people like you, entitled, arrogant men who think the rules do not apply to them. And do you know what? They all left eventually. They all gave up and sold their properties and went somewhere else, because I do not give up. I do not lose. You know what the difference is between me and those other people? I actually have money to fight you, and I have time, and I have a lawyer who specializes in suing abusive HOAs, so bring it on. Sharon, find me for everything you can think of. Send me nasty letters, harass me. Every single thing you do just makes my lawsuit stronger. There is no lawsuit. You agreed to binding arbitration. Binding arbitration can be challenged when the arbitration process is fundamentally unfair. My lawyer's already working on that. But here's the thing you are not getting. I do not care about the money anymore. You could fine me $1 million and I would not pay it. Because this stopped being about firewood or HOA fees. This is about principle. You are a bully with a tiny amount of power and you have been abusing it for years, and I am going to make sure everyone knows it. Sharon stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. If you think you can intimidate me, you are mistaken. I will bury you in paperwork. I will fine you every single week for every minor violation I can find. I will make your life in this community so miserable that you will beg to leave. and I will document every single thing you do and use it as evidence of harassment in court. You are helping me build my case, Sharon. Please, keep going." We stood there for a long moment, locked in a stare. Finally, Sharon turned and walked away. "This is not over," she called back. "No," I agreed. "It is not." Over the next month, Sharon made good on her threat. I received violation notices for everything imaginable. My grass was too long in one spot. My mailbox post was the wrong shade of black. I had left my garage door open during the day, which apparently violated some aesthetic standard. My outdoor light was too bright and constituted light pollution. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $100 to $500. Robert Brennan compiled everything into a massive file that he assured me would be devastating in court. But getting to court was the problem. The HOA filed for arbitration through their preferred arbitrator, a retired lawyer who had apparently ruled in favor of HOAs in 17 out of 18 previous cases. We countered with a motion to invalidate the arbitration clause on grounds that it was unconscionable and designed to prevent homeowners from accessing the court system. That motion was pending before a judge in Carroll County Superior Court. In the meantime, I made sure to follow every single HOA rule to the letter, documented everything with timestamps and photos, and kept my trail cameras running. I was not going to give them any legitimate violations to use against me. Karren Morrison's lawsuit quietly went away after Robert sent his response. Apparently, her attorney did some research and realized that suing someone for injuries you suffered while trespassing to commit theft was not a winning strategy. Karren herself had apparently learned her lesson. She had not come anywhere near my property since the Hornet incident. I occasionally saw her driving through the neighborhood, and she would glare at me with pure hatred, but she kept her distance. In January, my case finally got a hearing before Judge Patricia Foster in Carroll County Superior Court. The issue was narrow: whether the HOA's mandatory arbitration clause was enforceable given the circumstances of my case. Robert filed a brief arguing that the arbitration clause was unconscionable because it forced homeowners to use arbitrators who were financially dependent on HOAs for business, creating an inherent conflict of interest. He included statistics showing that the specific arbitrator the HOA wanted to use ruled for HOAs 94% of the time and had been hired by Pine Ridge Estates HOA for 3 previous cases. The HOA's attorney, a slick guy from Concord named David Parrish, argued that I had voluntarily agreed to the arbitration clause when I purchased my property and that courts should enforce private contracts as written. The hearing took less than an hour. Judge Foster, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, asked pointed questions of both attorneys. She seemed particularly interested in the arbitrator's track record and whether I had any meaningful choice in agreeing to the arbitration clause. "Mr. Parrish," she said at one point, "you are arguing that your client can insert any arbitration clause they want into these agreements, and homeowners just have to accept it?" "Your Honor, the plaintiff had the opportunity to review the HOA documents before purchasing. If he disagreed with the arbitration clause, he could have chosen not to buy the property. That is a bit like saying someone can choose not to buy a house if they do not like the color of the kitchen. In practice, HOA membership is mandatory in these communities. There is no negotiation. And if all HOAs in a given area use similar clauses, homeowners have no real choice at all. Your Honor, the law is clear that arbitration clauses are favored. The law is also clear that unconscionable contracts are not enforceable. I am taking this under advisement. You will have my ruling within 2 weeks." We walked out of the courthouse, and Robert was cautiously optimistic. "She gets it," he said. "She understands that these arbitration clauses are designed to prevent homeowners from accessing the courts. I think we have a good chance." The ruling came down 11 days later. Judge Foster issued a 14-page decision invalidating the arbitration clause as unconscionable and allowing my case to proceed in court. She specifically cited the arbitrator's track record and the lack of meaningful choice for homeowners as key factors. It was a major victory, but it was just the first step. Now we had to actually prove our case that the HOA had engaged in harassment and retaliation. Discovery started immediately. Robert subpoenaed all HOA records related to violations, fines, and board meetings for the past 5 years. We requested all emails between Sharon Henderson and other board members mentioning my name. We demanded records of the gate camera footage that would show who accessed my property. The HOA fought every request, claiming privacy concerns and attorney-client privilege. But Judge Foster was not having it. She ordered them to produce the documents or face sanctions. What we found was damning. Emails between Sharon and Karren Morrison showed that Sharon had explicitly encouraged Karren to take my firewood, calling it teaching that arrogant newcomer a lesson about community. Other emails showed Sharon discussing strategies to make Zimmerman's life difficult and force him out of Pine Ridge. There were also records showing that the HOA had issued an average of 3 violation notices per year to other residents, while I had received 23 in 3 months. The disparity was so obvious it could not be explained as anything other than targeted harassment. We also found records of the 3 previous lawsuits Robert had discovered. The settlement agreements were confidential, but the underlying complaints painted a picture of Sharon Henderson systematically abusing her power, targeting residents she did not like, and using the HOA's authority to punish anyone who challenged her. Robert filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the evidence was so clear that we did not even need a trial. The HOA had engaged in obvious harassment and retaliation, and they should be ordered to rescind all fines, pay my legal fees, and remove Sharon Henderson from the board. The HOA's response was to offer a settlement. They would rescind all fines if I agreed to drop the lawsuit and sign a confidentiality agreement. No, I told Robert immediately. This is not about the money. This is about making sure she cannot do this to anyone else. I agree, Robert said, but I want you to understand that if we turn this down, they will fight hard. This will go to trial. It will be expensive. How expensive? Probably $30,000 to $40,000 in legal fees by the time we are done. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Do it. I want this on the record. I want everyone to see what she did. We rejected the settlement and pushed toward trial. The HOA responded by getting more aggressive. They hired a private investigator to follow me around, apparently looking for any dirt they could find. They sent letters to my neighbors asking if I had violated any community standards. They even contacted my employer, somehow getting my boss's email and sending a letter raising concerns about my erratic and aggressive behavior. That last one backfired spectacularly. My boss forwarded me the email with a note saying, "What the hell's this about?" I explained the situation, and he was furious that some random HOA president thought she could interfere with his employee. He actually wrote her back defending me and threatening his own legal action if she contacted my workplace again. Every action the HOA took just generated more evidence of harassment. Robert was practically gleeful. "They cannot help themselves," he said. "Sharon is so used to getting away with this stuff that she does not realize how bad it looks to a judge." The trial was scheduled for May. As the date approached, the HOA made one more settlement offer, this time for $50,000 plus rescinding all fines and removing Sharon from the board. It was tempting. With that money, I would come out ahead even after legal fees. But I talked to Robert about what would happen if we went to trial. "If we win, and I think we will, the judge could order them to pay all your legal fees plus damages. You could walk away with more than the settlement. But there is always risk in a trial. Judges can be unpredictable." What happens to Sharon if we win at trial? She would be removed from the board. The court could also order the HOA to implement new governance rules to prevent this from happening again. It would be a public ruling, so anyone could see it. It would be a real mark against her. Then we go to trial. The trial started on May 20th, 2026. It was held in the same courthouse where we had fought over arbitration, but this time in a larger courtroom with a full jury. Robert had argued that this was a case about property rights and civil rights, and we were entitled to a jury trial. Judge Foster agreed. Jury selection took most of the first day. We ended up with 8 jurors, 5 women and 3 men, ranging in age from late 20s to early 70s. Several of them lived in HOA communities themselves, which could cut either way. Robert's opening statement was strong. He laid out the timeline of events, from the first theft to the Hornet incident to the barrage of retaliatory fines. He presented it as a simple story of a homeowner trying to protect his property and an HOA president abusing her power to punish him for it. The HOA's attorney tried to paint me as a troublemaker who refused to follow community rules and caused problems for everyone. He argued that the fines were legitimate enforcement of rules I had agreed to follow. Then came the testimony. I was first on the stand, and I walked through everything that had happened. Robert had coached me to stay calm, stick to the facts, and not let the HOA attorney get under my skin during cross-examination. David Parrish tried his best. Mr. Zimmerman, is it true that you called one of your neighbors a thief? I called Karren Morrison a thief because she stole my firewood. She was subsequently criminally charged with theft, so yes, I called her what she was. Is it true that you threatened to call the police over what amounted to a minor neighborly misunderstanding? There was no misunderstanding. She took my property without permission. That is theft. Calling the police is the appropriate response to theft. Is it true that you installed security cameras pointed at common areas where your neighbors had a reasonable expectation of privacy? The cameras point at my woodshed, which is on my property. They capture anyone who approaches my woodshed. If my neighbors were not trying to steal from me, they would have no reason to be captured on camera. He went after me for an hour, but I do not think he landed any real blows. The facts were just too clearly on my side. Then we called our witnesses. Deputy Chen testified about responding to my theft reports and finding the evidence sufficient to charge Karren Morrison. He also testified that Sharon Henderson had called him to complain about my filing police reports, which he found unusual and inappropriate. We called several other Pine Ridge residents who testified about Sharon's heavy-handed leadership style. One man described being fined repeatedly for minor violations after he questioned a budget item at a board meeting. A woman testified that Sharon had tried to force her to remove a vegetable garden because it was not on the approved landscaping list, even though nothing in the HOA documents prohibited gardens. The most damaging testimony came from the fifth board member, the younger woman who had hesitated before voting to uphold my fines at the board meeting. Her name was Jennifer Wu, and she had apparently grown a conscience. I was intimidated by Sharon, she testified. She made it clear that if I did not vote with the majority, she would make my life difficult. I saw what she did to residents who challenged her, and I did not want that to happen to me. Looking back, I'm ashamed that I did not stand up for Mr. Zimmerman when it was obvious he was being treated unfairly. The HOA tried to discredit her as a disgruntled former board member with an axe to grind, but she was credible and sympathetic. The jury was paying close attention. Then came Sharon's testimony. Robert put her on the stand and methodically walked her through the emails we had discovered. She tried to claim they were taken out of context or that she was joking, but the words were right there in black and white. Teaching that arrogant newcomer a lesson about community was hard to spin as anything other than retaliation. Make Zimmerman's life difficult until he leaves was explicit harassment. Under cross-examination, Sharon got defensive and angry. She started lecturing the jury about how hard it was to run an HOA, how ungrateful residents were, how much time and effort she put into maintaining property values. She was used to being in charge, and she did not like being questioned. Robert let her talk, giving her enough rope to hang herself. By the time she left the stand, several jurors were openly frowning at her. Karren Morrison testified for the defense, trying to paint herself as the victim. She claimed she had genuinely believed the firewood was community property, that she had been confused by Sharon's emails, and that she was terrified of me after the Hornet incident. Robert's cross-examination was brutal. Ms. Morrison, you drove to Mr. Zimmerman's property at 2 a.m. to take his firewood. Why did you go at 2 a.m. if you thought it was legitimate community sharing? I work during the day. You work at 2 a.m? No, I thought it would be easier when he was not around. Easier to take his property without him knowing about it. That is not what I meant. You were charged with theft by the sheriff's department. You pleaded guilty and paid a fine. That is a matter of public record. I pleaded guilty to make it go away. It was not worth fighting over. So you pleaded guilty to a crime you did not commit? Yes, no. I do not know. It was painful to watch. By the end, even the HOA's attorney looked like he wished he had not put her on the stand. Closing arguments were on the 5th day of trial. Robert hammered home the pattern of harassment, the retaliatory fines, and the abuse of power. He asked the jury to send a message that HOAs could not just run roughshod over homeowners' rights. The HOA's attorney tried to appeal to any jurors who lived in HOAs, arguing that without strong enforcement, communities would fall apart. He claimed I was trying to undermine the whole concept of community governance. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. We find in favor of the plaintiff, William Zimmerman, on all counts. We find that the Pine Ridge Estates HOA engaged in harassment and retaliation. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $25,000 and punitive damages in the amount of $100,000. We further recommend that the court order the removal of Sharon Henderson from the HOA board and implement oversight measures to prevent future abuse. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Then I heard Sharon make a choking sound. I looked over and saw her staring at the jury in disbelief. Judge Foster thanked the jury and scheduled a hearing for the following week to determine additional relief in attorney's fees. Outside the courthouse, Robert was ecstatic. That is a huge verdict. The punitive damages alone are more than I expected. And the jury recommendation about removing Sharon is going to carry weight with the judge. What happens now? The HOA will almost certainly appeal, but they are going to have a hard time overturning a jury verdict with this much evidence. In the meantime, they have to comply with the judgment. That means they need to rescind all your fines and stop the harassment immediately. The following week, Judge Foster issued her order. In addition to the jury's damages award, she ordered the HOA to pay all my legal fees, which came to just under $42,000. She also ordered Sharon Henderson removed from the board immediately and barred from serving in any HOA leadership position for 5 years. Finally, she ordered the HOA to implement new governance procedures, including term limits for board members, mandatory training on fair housing and homeowner rights, and an independent ombudsman to review complaints against the board. It was everything I had hoped for and more. The HOA filed an appeal, but it was half-hearted. 3 months later, they settled the appeal by agreeing to pay the full judgment plus an additional $25,000 to cover my attorney's fees for defending the appeal. In exchange, I agreed not to seek further damages. Sharon Henderson resigned from the community entirely. She put her house up for sale and moved to Florida. Karren Morrison stayed but kept a very low profile. I occasionally saw her at community events, and she would not even make eye contact. The new HOA board, elected after Sharon's removal, was night and day different. They actually listened to residents, enforced rules fairly and consistently, and treated people with respect. The community became what it was supposed to be, a nice place to live without the drama and abuse. I kept my cabin and my woodshed. I still locked the gate, but I have not had any problems with theft since the trial. The trail cameras are still up just in case, but mostly they just capture deer and the occasional bear wandering through. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it, spending more than a year fighting the HOA and dealing with all the stress and harassment. The answer is yes, absolutely. Not just because I won and got my money back, but because it needed to be done. Sharon Henderson had been abusing her power for years, and nobody had stood up to her because it was easier to just pay the fines or move away. Sometimes you have to fight back against bullies, even when it is hard, even when it is expensive, even when everyone tells you to just let it go. Because if you do not, the bullies win. And they will keep winning until someone finally says enough. I learned a lot from this experience. I learned that HOAs can be incredibly abusive when there is no accountability. I learned that standing up for yourself sometimes requires creativity, like leaving wasp-infested logs out for thieves who would not take no for an answer. I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can actually work if you have the resources and determination to use it. Most importantly, I learned that Karren should have bought her own damn firewood. As I write this, it is winter again, a full year after this whole mess started. I'm sitting in my cabin with a fire going in the wood stove, fueled by wood that I cut, split, and stacked myself. Wood that nobody tried to steal. Outside, snow is falling gently on the pines, and the mountains are barely visible through the storm. It is peaceful here now, the way it was always supposed to be. And if anyone asks me about that crazy year when I went to war with my HOA over firewood and hornets, I just smile and say, it was worth every penny and every minute, because sometimes standing up for what is right is more important than taking the easy path. The HOA learned that lesson the hard way. So did Sharon Henderson and Karren Morrison. And Pine Ridge Estates is a better community because of it. Justice, as it turns out, sometimes comes with a sting.